In this demonstration, we will be flushing the transmission system, we will be replacing the transmission fluid, and we will be replacing the transmission filter in a 2001 Ford F-150. Prior to starting this procedure, we're going to remove this guard located underneath the front of the vehicle. And this is going to give us better access to our oil cooler supply and return lines. Now, if we take a look at the transmission, we can actually see our supply and return lines coming out of our transmission and heading towards the front of the vehicle. As they come towards the front of the vehicle, you'll notice one splits off to the right and one goes up into the oil cooler. And there's actually two oil coolers, so one is going to our first oil cooler and one is probably coming from the other oil cooler. Since I'm not sure which line is the supply and which line is the return, we're going to go ahead and loosen up our lines. And you'll want to place a drip pan beneath these before you remove them, because when we take them out, there will be some transmission fluid that will come out. Now at this point, I've removed both of my oil lines going into the oil cooler, and I position them so that they're going to drip into a drip pan. Now what I'm going to do to figure out which one is the supply line and the return line, I'm going to start the vehicle for about 1 to 2 seconds and then turn it off. And whichever hose has a constant flow right when I start the vehicle, that's going to be my supply line. Now that we've identified our supply line, we can go ahead and reinstall these hoses into the oil cooler. Since this transmission has been running conventional transmission fluid for about 100,000 miles, we will be running Amsoil's engine and transmission flush through the system prior to removal and replacement of the transmission fluid. To use Amsoil's engine and transmission flush, you need to locate the fill tube for the transmission fluid. And we're going to be using a funnel with a real small end. And then we're going to add Amsoil's engine and transmission flush to our transmission. Now in the transmission, deposits can form on the clutch plates, which will cause hesitation and erratic shifting. Ultimately, clutch glazing can set in and it will reduce the life of the transmission. Replace the dipstick and we will be ready to idle our vehicle. Prior to starting the vehicle, you'll want to set the emergency brake. Another benefit to using Amsoil's transmission flush is that it will clean the deposits in the oil cooler. In this case, this vehicle has 2 oil coolers. It'll clean the ports and it'll help unclog all the fluid passages. And we're going to idle the vehicle for about 10 to 15 minutes. We're going to make sure that we shift through drive and reverse. So I'm just going to go through every gear. You also want to make sure when you're using Amsoil's transmission flush that you do not place the vehicle under any heavy load. You just want it to idle. And this is going to help Amsoil's engine and transmission flush to go through all the different nooks and crannies in the transmission. Once we've idled the vehicle for about 10 to 15 minutes, we are ready to drain our transmission pan. But as you can see, there is no drain plug, so we're going to have to go ahead and drop the pan to get all the fluid out. Now, as we loosen up these bolts, we don't want to go around in a circle. We want to make sure that if we loosen one bolt, the next bolt we loosen is going to be across from it. And we're going to continue around in that fashion until all the bolts are loosened up. Now, before removing any of the bolts, I'm going to position my drip pan underneath the transmission pan. And I'm going to start just by removing the bolts on one corner. As I remove the bolts from the corner of the transmission pan, we started to have transmission fluid come out. So we're going to let this drain for just a little while until the level gets a little bit lower. Now that the fluid leaking out has slowed down, we're going to move around and take out just a couple more bolts on either side of this corner and drain out just a little bit more. As I work slowly around, taking one bolt out at a time, you can see the transmission pan starting to fall real slowly. And with the pan still hanging by about 4 bolts, I'm going to take Amsoil's fluid extraction pump, and I'm going to pump out some of the excess transmission fluid. The fluid extraction pump works simply by placing the hose in the transmission pan. We're going to pull back on the plunger. It's going to suck the fluid into the pump, and then we can remove that and extract that fluid into our drip pan. Now that the majority of the transmission fluid has been removed, it will be easier to handle the pan. The manufacturer recommends replacing the transmission fluid every 30,000 miles or 24 months. With the use of Amsoil's automatic transmission fluid, the recommended service life is 50,000 miles for severe service or up to 100,000 miles in normal service. But you want to be careful because there will still be fluid in the pan. By taking the pan off and removing the fluid from the pan, we're actually only taking out about half of the transmission fluid from the entire system. So you just need to keep that in mind for a little bit later. Out of curiosity, I wanted to see how much fluid we actually took out just by dropping the pan. As you can see, we're up to almost 1.5 gallons. Now, this particular vehicle has a reusable gasket, so if the gasket is in good condition, we're going to go ahead and reuse that. And it's important to take a look inside the pan because we have a magnet, and then we also have all this debris in the bottom of the pan. Now, the magnet is going to collect any metallic particles that is circulating around in the transmission. Over time, it builds up, and that magnet needs to be cleaned off. Additionally, the bottom of the pan, we need to clean that as well. Now, it's obvious on this magnet, there's a lot of buildup, and this has probably not been cleaned in a very long time if it's ever been cleaned. We're going to go through and clean that off. And also we're going to clean the bottom of the pan. Now, when I dropped the transmission pan, I found this little yellow plunger inside of it, and there's no apparent location for where it goes, so I did a little research online and found out that Ford uses the plug in the dipstick hole during the manufacturing process before the dipstick gets installed. And when the dipstick tube is installed into the transmission pan, it pops that plunger off and it sits in the bottom of the pan. Now, because this is in there, that tells me that this pan has never been removed from the vehicle, which again tells me that the magnet inside of it has never been changed, and you know, at the very most, maybe somebody ran a flush system to clean the transmission fluid. Once our pan is all cleaned, we're ready to move on. When using Amsoil's engine flush, you need to make sure you replace the transmission pan filter. As we take a look inside our old filter and our new filter, the old filter on the left obviously has caught a lot of contaminants, and our new filter on the right obviously is clean. Next, we can install our new filter. After putting on the new filter, I'm ready to reinstall the transmission pan. Just make sure you inspect the gasket before you put that on. This gasket was in good condition, so I'm reusing the gasket because that's what Ford says I can do. Once all the bolts are finger tight, we're going to want to come back with a torque wrench and torque each bolt between 106 and 133 inch-pounds. Since we removed 1.5 gallons of transmission fluid by dropping the pan and changing the filter, we're going to put in 1.5 gallons. Amsoil's automatic transmission fluid is designed for most all North American, European, and Asian vehicles, and it's engineered to outperform conventional automatic transmission fluids. Additionally, it exceeds the performance requirements by the manufacturers. Now, what we're going to do is leave our funnel in the engine. We're going to go under the vehicle, disconnect the supply line that we found earlier. We're going to run the vehicle while adding more fluid, and what this is going to do is it's going to flush the torque converter. So first we need to disconnect our supply line again. As the vehicle is running, you want to make sure that you are adding automatic transmission fluid. You never want the transmission to run out of fluid, otherwise it will damage the transmission. Once the dirty fluid has changed from a dark red or dark brown to a nice translucent red, then you can shut the vehicle off. And now we can reinstall our supply line back into the oil cooler. Once we've reconnected our lines, we need to go ahead and replace that metal guard that we took off. When you're finished, you'll want to clean off any spills in your engine and check your transmission fluid just to make sure it's at the right level. Now, I've been keeping track of how much transmission fluid we've flushed. This reservoir holds 3 gallons, and we filled that all the way full. And then I have another drip pan on top of that, and that's probably about 3/4 full. All in all, we've flushed through a good 15 quarts of transmission fluid. Out of curiosity, I took a sample of the old transmission fluid when I first took it out, and I also took a sample of the new transmission fluid. The old transmission fluid on the left is obviously very dark red and full of contaminants, whereas the new fluid on the right is a nice translucent red.